add to my bio, which I don't think I'm the wife of a sailing coach who's been to 2 Olympic Games, so I feel the world on the other side of an absent partner, if that makes sense. And a sister-in-law of another sailing coach in New Zealand, and a sister-in-law the other way of a swimming coach in America in university. So we're quite around coaching from the other side as well as working with coaches, which is a massive honour. Which started alongside working with teenagers in a secondary school at the bottom of the M3 near Southampton, teaching geography. And there's no battleground quite like a world of 11 to 16-year-olds, which is an amazing opportunity, to get them to love learning, to understand who is in the room, to work with those 11-year-old brains, which to develop into these lovely 16-year-old brains with a bit of a woo at 13. It's just this gorgeous journey of when is that individual going to click? When is geography going to fall into line for those children? When is, because that was the word I saw. And as I work now with coaches who are obviously all sorts of ages and really 11 to 16, the thing for me is still, when is it going to click for those coaches? And when are other things going to click? When they are working on things, when is it their time for things to slot together? When is it their time to become really curious about things and to support them with what it is that they're doing? When is it their time to open up into a new area? And the other thing that, as I'm watching athletes through coaches' eyes to understand their world, is all of these people we work with, myself, all of you, we are still that 11-year-old, that 13-year-old, that 16-year-old. Of course, we're now older. But a lot of the learning behaviours that we had then, we still have now. The learning experience we had then absolutely shapes how we approach learning. So the curiosity about who we are working with and who we are as a learner, as an adult, is an absolute massive curiosity. Because as we get older, we often become protected from being vulnerable. We become protected from being put under pressure, being put on the spot. In a secondary classroom, firing out questions all over the place. I don't know, it's fine to say I don't know. As we get older, it becomes a bit less okay. So it's a really interesting journey that we go on with coaches to support them with. When we can create a space, how we create a space where it's okay to say, I don't know, how do we find out? And so it's a real privilege to work with coaches. I'd love you to just have a pen and paper or some, do a little bit of typing on a computer. We're just going to jot down a couple of notes, really, as we get you thinking about yourself as coaches. So the first question that I'd just like you to jot down a few words for is, what do we expect of our athletes? What do we expect? I'm just going to give you 15 seconds. Just jot down a few words. What do we expect of our athletes? Pen and paper are our brain's biggest friends sometimes. Jotting down what's in our brain to free up our working memory, to allow it more space to interact with things in the short term. What do we expect of our athletes? Let's go on this side. Let's have a couple of things from this side. Who would like to, who's got some very brightly coloured socks on? Anyone got brightly coloured socks? Sort of, go for it. What's one of them?
To be engaged.
Yes, absolutely. We want our athletes to be engaged. And we want them to be engaged for as long as possible. We work to keep that engagement as optimum. Over here, anyone's got a birthday this month, the month of August? Anyone this bit got a birthday? This one, like, no.
Relative event.
Oh, yes, brilliant, thank you. Oh, happy birthday for them. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Engaged and open to learning. That is exactly what we want. When with the sailing team, they did a coach swap back in Palma, Mallorca, before an event, and it was amazing what the other coaches experienced with these squads. Now, in sailing, we have 10 medals at the Olympics, and we call them squads. We're starting to call them, what's a bit clunky, individuals within groups, because they're not a squad. They're all competing for one little space. So the idea of a squad is a challenge. But individuals, absolutely. A group who are making the most of each other, absolutely. And they did a coach swap. It was amazing what the sailors brought to the new coach for the day, and the tolerant self, the curious self, the engaged self, the open to learning self. And you have other coaches saying, I have been trying to tell them that for quite a long time, or trying to get them to see that. So those two things, is exactly what we're expecting of our athletes. Let's think about this then. Let's jot down a couple of things for us now. what do we expect of ourselves when it comes to learning, when it comes to to us in our role? What do we expect? Okay, Laurie. I only know 2 people in there. Laurie, give me a number.
A number.
A number. 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's someone in that row back there. What was there? We can go from all 3 of you actually. One thing you said about what do you expect of yourself?
I'm very big in what they did in the repetition work, so exactly the same as what I said for the last week, openness, willingness, and persistence.
Yeah, super. What did you say?
Yeah, positivity, balance, and then continuous growth and development.
Yeah, absolutely. What else?
I don't know what it says, but the first thing that came to mind was sacrifice, but patience.
Yeah, I think sacrifice is right as well. But yeah, and patience. And absolutely, we often expect of ourselves what we expect of our athletes. It can look sometimes a bit different. What do our athletes expect of us? Taking it from that other perspective now, what do they expect of us? I'll just give you 15 seconds of this one. Tom, give me a middle left or right.
Left.
Left. This is just my left, yes. Martin, my third name, sorry. Martin, give me one thing. What do our athletes expect from us when we're in that coaching role?
To listen to them.
Yeah, which is massive. When I work with coaches, I often do a lot on questioning, which I probably follow up, so you've got to listen to the answer. It's one thing to think of the question, but what about the answer that comes? Does that need another question? Does that need some praise? Does that need some correction? Does that need to bounce out as another question? Questioning is just kind of one thing, and that listening is massive. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go over to this side of the room. One thing from here, what do our athletes expect from us?
Caring.
Yeah, absolutely. That's massively, massively. Caring about the whole person. And what else were you going to say?
We're competent.
Yeah. And that competency is growing and growing and growing. Trust erodes very quickly when that competency goes down. So how we take control of our learning to show them that we are learning is really key. I listened to a BBC interview with Adam Peaty and James Wilby after James had got the gold, and Adam came forth, and the presenter, she said, the interviewer said, doesn't matter how great we are always learning. And sport is about taking your opportunities, and quite often, that's really hammered into the athletes, because we don't always have a coach developer working alongside us. Sometimes we're working in isolation. It's how we keep that method and that kind of thought process in there. One of the things I loved when I read this book, when I first discovered Doug Lamothe, who I just love basically, and one of the things that stood out was this supermodeling. I read that chapter 18, and in a modelable way we want learners to perform. And it just was so, and at this moment you think, absolutely. If I'm going to show that I'm learning, I have to speak about it. If I'm going to show I'm learning, I have to show my curiosity. I have to sometimes show my vulnerability. I have to show that I am improving. Because if someone's got a bit of a question mark, does she have that technical knowledge? Well, actually today, maybe not, but I've spoken to someone. And I spoke to them, I took your questions to them, and we had a conversation about it. So 2 days later, I've got an answer for you. And actually, in our sport at the moment in sailing, we've gone from 10 boats, with 8 boats and 2 windsurfers, to now 6 boats, 2 windsurfers that foil, so go as fast as anything, and then 2 kite foiling, like kite surfing foiling thing. And that's very bad, actually, that's terrible. how I kind of explain that. But our sport has really diversified. So we've got coaches working in environments that are quite new because the sport has developed. And so how they show their learning and how safety has become a massive factor. You know, the foil that you come out of the water, you know, the speed that we're making decisions at. It's quite a different sport from your classically plodding kind of sailing. So the sport has changed and the coaches have changed. And the more open the coaches are and how they're supermodeling this kind of new territory is really powerful for them keeping those relationships and being overt about it. So it's a great book if you haven't read it. I'm just going to give you 10 seconds to have a look at this, and I'm going to, when you think you know what this is, so you might have seen it before, please just put your hand up, not necessarily down to you. When you think you've got an answer of what this is about, you've got one. Of course, maybe two. Thank you, over to you. What do you think?
Perspective.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely about different perspectives. And, you know, we know that coaches can quite often work in silos. You know, you work the long days and you can work at funny times sometimes. Sometimes you've got other coaches with you, sometimes you don't. You might work as a team, but you're working as a team to talk about coaching. You're not necessarily working as a team to talk about your learning. And creating those environments is amazing. So when we work in a silo, and if we've got competition after competition after competition, we've got travel, and we've got all sorts of other things going on, how we invite those perspectives into our world is a real challenge. Because the perspectives are so key for showing us what we don't see, what we've missed. And that's one of the absolute joys of working with coaches, is when you stand on the sidelines with them and you can just ask these questions. In sailing, you know, it's quite a small community as these things often are, and so you're sometimes asking a question that's possibly quite obvious because it's what we've always done and I kind of know the answer, we were trying to make a point of. And I had the privilege of working with Leicester Tigers for a year and a half. It was amazing. I don't know rugby. For me, a back is a forward and a forward is a back. And my first question when I went into it was, why do they call forwards and backs when they run in a line? And someone said, well, watch a bit more and you'll see. My next thing was the fact that the backs run forward and the forwards show their back. I'm like, this makes no sense, you know. So it was a really interesting one, but in that environment, with no real knowledge of the game, as that it demonstrates, I could ask these lovely questions that I don't know if they're awkward or not, and that's brilliant. Because I'm bringing a different perspective. So what's the point of the huddle? Why do these massive people get down to here and huddle? You know, and why are some of them walking around doing something, and some of the academy guys are kind of over here thinking, is this for me, is this not? I'm like, are they telling secrets? Because what are these secrets? And are they master lip readers? Because I'm not sure they are. You know, so what is this huddle? And it's just a very interesting, good point. Do we need some rules for the huddle? Because if the huddle is to tell secrets, surely we need everyone to hear the secret. If the huddle is to just share what we're going to do for the next line out, well, we can stand up and be the 6'7" guys that we are. You know, and so it's quite interesting to be able to have the different perspectives. So the question always is, who's the different perspective on us? Who's the person who's making us curious? Who's the person who's coming to us with the curious questions? And sometimes we have someone who's on the sideline, who, you know, it involves a bit of contracting sometimes. It's very hard to say, can you come and watch me? Sure, I'll come and watch you. Come and watch me. What do you want feedback on? Actually, are you inviting me to give you feedback? You know, you kind of got to set it up in a way that makes it a space that what you've asked for is actually what you're going to get. There's a fine line between being honest and having trust. You know, you sometimes don't want total honesty, but you want to trust someone, you know, to talk about what might be most relevant or what you've asked them to talk about. So who we invite into our world, how we invite people into our world, how we make it a safe space for that curiosity to be unleashed, how we make it a safe space that we don't it doesn't just bring our chimp out straight away and think, oh my God, that's terrible, I'm fine, thank you very much. And do what I was doing. So how we create this environment around us is really key. And one of the things we talk a lot about saying, we're really lucky, there's a team of about 7 or 8 of us who work with 16 coaches. And we're not full-time, that'll be quite overpowering. But we kind of dip in and out from various places and spend time. If we're born full-time, I guess the rest of us make up half-time, possibly. Part-time, half a job. But what we have is these meetings when we come together and talk about how do we, coaches will often say, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. is that what they need? And how do we help them see maybe what they need? And are we even right in what we think what they need? You know, and so how do we open up a coach like we might talk about the player? Because the players have a multidisciplinary team around them. The players will have input from strength and conditioning, from physio, from nutritionists, from the coach, from the psychologist, from the manager if it's relevant. You know, they have a team around them, and then the coaches don't often. So whose voice is most important? And we don't want to say to the coach, no, you can't look at that because we don't think that's most important, because you know, we need to get their curiosity. But how do we create a space around them that supports what it is that is a balance between wants and needs? Because they might be bang on, and what they want is what they need. But how do we open up those perspectives? So this is the Johari window, which some of you may have heard of before. And it's a really helpful tool that we will often use to see what people know of themselves. And this is a framework. We all work quite differently. We don't have a kind of indoctrination in sailing to become a coach developers. We're not robots. And so we have our own style. So I don't speak that everyone in sailing will kind of look at this. It depends on the coaches and the coach developer. But in terms of thinking about and trying to open them up to what they know about themselves, what others know, what they don't know, we're encouraging them to change the way they look at things. Because if they change the way they look at things, what they look at changes. And when we start trying to get them to see themselves as a 3D, spinning, moving piece of art that some of them just are, you know, how can we get them to see all angles? Because who the coach is also dependent on who they're interacting with. You know, so rugby, you've got a team of coaches and you've got 40 players. That's a huge amount of individual relationships. In sailing, you've got one coach and maybe 2 sailors, or up to, say, 8 sailors within individuals within a group. You know, but again, because that is, there's less sailors, they're quite intense relationships. Often travelling across Europe together, you've got like boats, you've got bridge, you've got, you know, you're bringing accommodation together. It can become quite intense. So how we get them opening up to have those differences is really key. And so with this, what we've got is, you know, this is a technique, this Johari window, that helps people understand their relationships, and how we support the coaches to understand their relationships. Because quite often, without a positive relationship, and I use the word positive carefully, learning can really struggle. And positive can be respect. If you respect that person, I don't know, I look back at a maths teacher, nobody really liked him who respected him. He was going to help us pass, and ultimately that's what they're there for. You've got your other teachers, you know, it's a positive environment because they engage with you. It's one of the classes you just wanted to run to, and you knew you were going to do really well too. You know, and so it's a positive environment. The deep or the kind of dangerous areas are the positive environments that are just fun, where the learning doesn't really happen. You know, they come side by side. And so how we create a positive learning environment with healthy relationships, that's what this is trying to do. And so what we've got are these 4 areas. We've got the arena. You know, it's known to us, it's known to others. You know, we are very aware of what we are and what we have. And those are really easy conversations that we can have with ourselves, and often coach developers can have with us, and we can have with other coaches, because it's known that that's that strength. We also have this area, which is a bit of a facade, that we know that we've got a strength of it or a weakness of it. But we maybe put something up to try and hide it. And as we get older, that facade can sometimes become quite thick and quite tall and quite wide, and it can be quite hard to get around the outside of it. And that's when we're working with coaches, really listening into their vocabulary. Same with teachers at secondary school in my background. You're trying to get around that facade to get to them, you know, and to try and listen to their words, to try and help them see that the facade is fine, and what's behind it can be really good, but the facade isn't helping. So, you know, it's how we kind of have that, and whether that's a helpful thing or not, which isn't always. We've got our blind spot, you know, so it's known to others and not known to us, and that can be so awkward, you know, and that's where the different perspective can really change a huge amount for a coach. You know, someone else or the teams, when you open up those conversations that have been contracted with a deep breath to say, you know, to have that vulnerability, to have that tolerance side. We've all got different sides. We're kind of I don't know, I can only get to a dodecahedron. No. Something with like 20, 50 sides. You know, and we can decide which side we give. So the side I give to my 3-year-old is about slightly different to the 5-year-old, slightly different to my husband, when he's been away and hasn't run for ages because it's the games, I do forgive him, but they are like, 2016 we had no children, I was just pregnant and on the sofa. Didn't mind him really, didn't want to speak to him. Then we had 2 kids. I'm like, hello, who are you? And so there's different sides that we can bring. And we can bring these different sides. And so this side, when we're trying to get a coach into their blind spot side, gee, that's tricky. Because we're trying to say to, we're trying to ask the coach, invite them. And it's very hard. Who invites who into the blind spot? Because they don't know who's never got a blind spot. And sometimes one other perspective on the blind spot, or you against them. And you kind of maybe got how many perspectives can we sometimes bring in, to help some of the coaches? Because we definitely have coaches, things fall down because of this blind spot. It's so obvious. We call it creeping something. We call it creep because you spot something, you think, oof, this isn't going to go so well. But what can we do? Maybe an event has happened. Maybe, and it could be failure, it could be, it could be all sorts of things. But these things creep. And you've noticed something, and you notice a bit more, and it's got a bit more, and the wedge is maybe a bit more, you think, oh gosh, these behaviours are cracking on. Standards are slipping, expectations are slipping, times are slipping. And then you've got something so big, you think, right, we've been here the whole time. So one of our things in sailing is to try and catch the creep as early as possible before trying to get into some different perspective on this blind spot is too big and too much of a big conversation. It can be quite shattering. For coaches, so opening up to those is a massive one. And the final one is the unknown. We don't know, they don't know. So how do we find the unknown? How do we find different readings, different authors, different podcasts, different environments we can go and watch to find what we don't know, so that we can be piqued by some of that curiosity. And so some of the things it's about who are we talking to, but also who are we not talking to. Sometimes when we find people who we connect with, that can be really good. But who do we find a bit prickly? But actually, let's go and explore some of those things with them. You don't have to change anything. You just listen to some different perspectives. It's that disruption. It's that reinforcement. It's all the things that we often do and set up for our athletes, and it's how we set that up for us. And it's not always easy, and that's what we tell our athletes. But in the long run, it will be better. So just into this kind of final section now, what I'm just going to share is some of the ways that we have been approaching working with coaches. And one of the things that's been really clear in sailing is that the coaches have a high performance campaign as well. We talk about the sailors having a campaign, it's a high performance campaign, and they have support with their campaign. So how do we support the coaches with their campaign? Because let's face it, when you are a coach at a careers, it doesn't matter. You're quite often a grassroots coach up to any level. You are immersed in that. You are immersed in that world. You're immersed in those people. And so, how do we support the coaches when we catch up with them, when we're working side by side, when we're meeting with them en masse or individually? How do we create a space where some of those who don't always open up, we can bounce them around different topics in a way of saying, kind of, here's an agenda, but it's not really an agenda because it depends what's most important. So we're creating something which, from our point of view, taps into all of the areas of a coach in sailing, but allows us to bounce to one of them and say, how about this? We talked about the safety, concussion questions is now a massive thing in sailing, especially for the 5 classes that are foiling, because they're just going so fast. How you rescue a kite, kites literally drop out of the sky when there's no wind. So it's quite a challenge. And only just in Marseille, kites also launch off the beach, and then you've got a lot of space. So in Marseille, it's illegal to launch a kite off the beach. That's where the sailing is going to be for the games. And they only just this last week got a bit of beach where they can launch. So before that, they were building platforms at the back, like a cool big paddleboard, I guess, and you launch the kites off that. Most other boats, coach launches, sailors launch, and you meet out there. So the safety considerations of the speed that some of these things are going. So how do we bring something like these new topics, which are really important, and if the sailors aren't trusting of their coach from a safety point of view, that's going to be a real problem for some of them. So with all of these things, what it's done is just provided us with headings that we can go to. We can let the sailor lead, and they take us to where their feeling is most important. But what it allows us to do is about management. This year we've got six of the 10 coaches are new to coaching at the Olympic level. They have huge experience in youth and development squad, P3 it used to be called, but they're new up into that Olympic level. Different pressures, it's a different world. And so how do we support them and bring areas, this up management is quite a thing, and being supported by managers being aware of the intensity of the world, is really key. So we can use those as conversations with the coaches, which has just helped us to bring some different areas to conversations which sometimes the coaches don't always go to naturally, and get them opening up and becoming more curious about. When I was working with, to be honest, anybody, but one of the things in coaching, and this came about really quite heavily in the rugby world, was such a team environment. In a classroom, it's what we do. As a geography teacher, I'd have 300 kids a year I'm teaching, from 11 to 16, and maybe 60 of them are doing a GCSE, so it's quite a big year, but the year 11s, coming to school, it's exciting. So everyone's got your full attention. And so who you've got in front of you is really important. And in coaching and in that relationship, teaching anything, that relationship is so important. And so understanding who we have is one of the areas that can sometimes be taken for granted. Come on in. If you're here for the coaches. No problem. Okay. Yeah. I like it more than the other one. So who we've got is really key. And there's so much to learn about everybody. If we know that everyone's got loads of sides, which side are we going to ask them to bring? You follow a second kid around a secondary school, private. They come into your room and you've got one kid. We generally have lovely times with kids. They go literally next door to a different teacher, they're in five mode. You think, crikey, who's this kid? Got to break time and that. They go into tutor time, you think, wow. Hello, no problem. He's got the van, it's fine. So who are we interacting with as coaches? And the same for us as that learner. Who have we got in the room, and how do we make sure that we've got the person who is curious and who is tolerant and who is open to being challenged? Because then how we might work on things is also really key. And how we might work on our learning, in the same way that we explore how we teach our coaches, is also really key. And there's often quite common methods. We often, because we're working inside and not travelling, we might have the access to, have access to podcasts, as we said, access to the books. How do we change that up a bit? Learning styles aren't a thing, but we definitely have a preference. And the science about our brain, which has existed for a while, but it's become very popular and very useful. Reading is okay. It's not that great because it's very familiar. You can read to reciting, doesn't mean you know it. To understand it, you can just remember the words. When we are listening to things, that's fine, but memory distracts. And when we can make notes, and it's amazing if you make notes what you've forgotten. And then some of the best things that we can do in terms of our learning is create those networks of talking. Because once you talk, the words that are moving around your head are committed. In the same way that, how we might work with our coaches. Pen and paper, commit to paper. Don't change your mind about, I was actually thinking that. No, write it down. And it's not about writing and making it like school, it's about freeing the brain of what it's trying to keep hold of. And it's the same for us. If we can speak it and kind of battle our thoughts in a nice way, with another coach, and coaches that are different, and bring some different perspectives to what it is that we're reading, then that can be really good. Because sometimes alone we go through things which connect to what we already know because it's a bit easier reading. So how do we challenge ourselves out there? So learning who we are as a learner, to make sure we bring our most tolerant and curious side to our learning, and as much as it's open as possible, is really key. And how we bring those different perspectives together is there. When we're coaching, when we're working ourselves, what we're doing is ultimately trying to close the gap of where our athletes are to where we want them to be. In coaching, it depends by sport, what the gold standard is, and it can be quite different by organisation and by sport. But some of the areas which can really support, we often, my experience with the coaches is that they might be reading about the sport, and reading about technical stuff. They might be reading about, and interacting with those contents, but what about themselves as a coach? That's a whole module in itself. Themselves as a learner. And so learning about learning from your own point of view, and of that to then apply to people that you're coaching, it is a huge area, which is just, I mean, this is my bag, this is what I love, this is kind of teaching and learning. But it's the area that I really try and bring to the coaches that I work with. How do we understand that learning to support the coaches, but also how do we understand that learning to support ourselves? So what the brain struggles with, what the brain can do, the pickles of the working memory and the amazingness of the long-term memory, but how the working memory can really get in the way, and how we need to support the long-term memory, which is why things like rereading doesn't really work. Your desirable difficulties, it is all about this testing, amazing. Commit your brain, you have to retrieve it, you right or you wrong, it's some amazing feedback that you can get on learning, so it isn't just, oh, I read that, yeah, that makes sense. All of these things can be really key. The language we're speaking in. I taught my daughter sailing. Every year we go sailing. She's now 5 and has a great time. It's how they're keeping her in the boat and off the boat. Sailing is not, there's quite a lot going on in a boat. And so you have a tiller and keep moving it, you keep turning. And some of them go across quite quick and you've got to watch your head. And we kept turning on one of them, so we don't attack, we're going for a jibe, and you're laughing through it, thinking, oh, this is great, you've got to duck your head, don't want to scare you, because I think this is great. And I was saying, in the middle, and I was saying straight, Eva. I took over. And she said, Mummy, why don't you just say stop? Thinking, yeah, why didn't I say stop? Because for her, that language makes sense. And when the language under pressure doesn't work straight, she's 5, what's straight? Life isn't straight. And she's not straight. So, it's, what is it for them? And so again, exploring this language that works for you in your world, and also then outwards, is just kind of so key. So whenever we work on this kind of stuff with athletes, we always do a side project with coaches. If we work on this with coaches, we always do a side project with the athletes. So when I was at Leicester, I was obviously working with the coaching team, but it's a dance. Coaching is a dance. We want to be dancing the same dance. And so there's nothing worse than, it's cool, someone's, and it doesn't matter, dance analogy. So what we're trying to do is that when we are working with the coaches, and we're trying to change the style of it. So it's not just, let's just kind of sit and occasionally answer a question. That sometimes, this isn't a specific Leicester example, that sometimes we know isn't actually a question. Any questions? We always got a question. Everyone happy? Of course they are. Until you get to an environment. And when you say any questions and someone asks a question, but, and you can trust that that was a good question, if you see what I mean, because it's, how are you? Oh gosh, I didn't really mean that, but so it's the questions that we ask sometimes that are really key. And so if the coaches are going to start developing their coaching, well, the players need to be a little bit prepared. And so at Leicester, I'd often work with the other side to say, when the coaches are doing this, they do mean it. It's not a rhetoric question. It's not optional, and they're not going to give you the answer. So get thinking. You've got a driver's awareness course in the UK. You cannot switch off. They are there with you. And it's good, because you are paying attention. And the privilege of doing one just last year. And I learned a great deal from it. I thought, yes, well done. That was a great hour and a half. And I'm now a much safer driver. Nothing bad happened. It just happened. Doesn't matter. So, here we go. Here we go. This is the final stuff. And I got this from Tom. I didn't know Tom was going to be here. But what this was on Twitter, I follow Tom. And he put, actually, it was about 10 questions that were really useful, I felt, for reflecting on your coaching. And these are just 5 of them. I think it was, from July. We'll scroll back a little bit. 21st of July, 12th of July, something like that. And they were just really lovely questions for delving into your thought. What do you need to let go of? I don't know. Probably my random stories if I ask someone, but actually the kids, they were right with them, so it's fine. But what do we need to let go of? We don't know, necessarily, because we're a window. So what do others know that we don't know? That is such a brave question. What do I need to let go of? You're kind of inviting a little bit of criticism. But if you invite it genuinely, what might you be letting go of that you're just not aware of? What strengths do you have that can be built on? Or that you can build on, that's fine, so it wasn't a typo. That you can build on. Again, you might know your strengths, but you might be totally oblivious to them. So how do you, what should you be building on? What do we need to bring out in you? When we talk to sometimes in a learning environment, who's talking? Do we want those people talking? Quite often the talkers can be the most confident, the best. The person with a relationship with the coach, which, maybe from kind of home clubs or whatever, are they the right people to be talking? Because if they're always answering the question, well, I know what they know, but what do the rest of them know? You know, so what strengths do we have that we need to build on? So if it's about building on, what we see and we think we know, there might be other things that we don't know. The relationships you need to invest in. And so taking this to that Jahari window, you know, what would your athletes want you to get better at? What might they want you to drop? Sometimes, because it could be two-way. Oh, my coach do this, I want you to do that. You know, but if you can get into that relationship, then that's going to be really, really key. So that is just a bit of a whistle through you as a coach, and the fact that, you know, we might work as a team, but it doesn't mean we work as a learning team. So how do we create a learning team that is tolerant, that is engaged, that is open, that has curiosity, to support us in the same way, with the same expectations that we have of our athletes every single day that they come to training? And you may do it, but if you do it, there's always more you can do, because you never know quite what you might do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, really thought-provoking. Right, questions, anyone? Please, from a name and where you come from, so everybody knows.
Simon, I work in the tennis coach. I wondered if you provided some of the frameworks and some tools that are really useful across sports there. I love some of the questions very thought-provoking. I wondered if you could provide a specific example of when you've worked with a coach, and talk us through the impact that you think you can have with that individual.
Good question. Oh, there's a lot.
From a practical sense.
Yeah. So different examples. So I'll give a short of a few. We're saying that we've got these coaches that have come, you know, they're up a level, and as I say, they're as much like, thank you, I'm here, hello everybody. Now with some of those, they are absolutely fantastic coaches, but they haven't been to the games necessarily. They might not have won a world championship or even got, you know, right up there. So they're in this world and thinking, crikey, but they're fantastic as coaches because they've got that job. So one of the jobs that I've had is a confidence building, of pointing out, one of my things is let's hunt for the treasure before the deficit. You know, I think it's from school that, like, an inspector is a bit like Ofsted. Ofsted's not a good thing in school. People, they come to watch me, and they judge. And so how can we create that, we're looking for treasure, you know, and so that confidence building has been really key. Another one has, one of the coaches working alongside was about confidence and about, it was about planning, but we could do the planning, but then it was the delivery of what had been planned. So it was about their confidence, their projection, their eye contact. And so we would practice what had been planned for that first session, and that coach would stand up and say, you know, quite one in a row, to go with it, it's just like drama back at school, but he'd stand up and say, okay, so stop, talk to me. And I'm going to stand at the back of the room and out a little bit, you know, and talk to me. And so that was again about the skills of being and having that presence to engage that room. With other coaches, we've looked at what they need to do to improve in a specific area. So when there's been technical changes, where are the relationships that they need to build? Who in the team can do that support, and who in the wider world can they connect with to learn about an area that hasn't been with our sport before? So helping them think of what they want to get to in terms of maybe specific knowledge, but also what that will do for them. And so they don't just leave with a to-do list, but the feeling of the to-do list having been completed. And trying to help them make sense of what is seemingly quite a big task, but how it can be broken down. And with others, it can just be about their coaching. So they've asked me to come in and asked me just to notice. What do you notice today in this environment? And that's the best invitation. And again, I said, do you actually mean everything? You know, what do I notice? Athletes, coaches, you, like the room, is everything. And so then that's the opportunity to really notice and ask those questions. How many of your athletes are deaf, half deaf, rugby? I'm like looking at his ears, thinking, you can hear? You know, so where are they in a classroom? You know, where are the children who are a bit visually impaired? Where are the children who are have hearing difficulties? Where are the children whose home is a bit sketchy? You know, where are the children who aren't going to have a pen? Where are the children who are really going to fly? Where are the children who just love this? Where are who sat in the room? You know, and noticing some of the behaviours, because believe me, even quite old and quite big people can can shy away when questions come their way. And you know, so you're picking up on behaviours which have existed. So, yeah, that's just 4 examples.
Thank you. One more question, thank you.
Question card for being similar to slide. I just probably want to unpick really what you mean some of those blind spots.
Yeah.
Some examples there that something should prepare and how perhaps the coaches should have those blind spots and deal with them.
It's tricky. It's really, really tricky. And the coaches with some, it depends. I guess you can have some coaches with a blind spot and a full stop. And that's really hard. Because, wow. And then I spend my whole day and the whole hour just in my head thinking, how do I invite them to be willing to hear what, to understand where they're coming from, but for them to share that truthfully and for them to be able to take my take on it as well. And that can be a real challenge. And so I'm just concocting words and questions all day long and trying to build furiously a relationship where they become safer. If they've got blind spots, but we've got the relationship, or they're in a culture that's really open, then that's a really nice one, because you're straight in. So you can sometimes just go and say, do you know that when you said this, they did that? Like, right, I didn't even see that. And so an example would be, did you know, and it doesn't matter whether it's academy players, or the guys that have just come up a level in funding in sailing, with those 2 environments, or a new kid to the class. Do you know that when you fired that question to them 5 minutes in, they haven't got a clue. They probably don't necessarily want to speak in front of everybody because they haven't quite gauged the room yet, And so there's sometimes some blind spots on, some of those relationships or set-up things, coaching things which they're not aware of. A blind spot alone is trying to create that curiosity. Now, it doesn't mean they do anything about it. So we've got the coaches who've got these blind spots that are so visible, and you can have a lot of questions about them. But then there's the inaction because of the curiosity. I'm not sure why. So you get the combination sometimes.
One thing, you made me think about something with the blind spots before, because sometimes the blind spots might not be negative.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we have blind spots about things that we are very good at, and even sometimes about things that we think are negative, and we're trying to get rid of them, but actually our athletes quite like you when you do that stuff. So it goes both ways, really, the positives and the negatives, and it's just sometimes either, like you say, asking someone to come in and look at it, or to take 360 feedback all around and be strong to Right, listen, a lot to think about there. We've got, first of all, let's please thank Aaron again